I'd been walking for 2 hours when I realized the creek on my left wasn't on the map. My name is Derek. I was 34 when this happened. I was a logistics coordinator for a freight company out of Fort Smith, Arkansas. I took long weekend hikes alone when the job got to be too much. I'd done it a dozen times. It wasn't unusual. That October, I drove out to the Ouachita National Forest and parked my Tacoma at the Winding Stair Campground trailhead off Highway 270. 10-mile loop on the Horsethief Springs Trail, back at the truck by 4, dinner at the Sonic in Mena on the way home. Simple. I'd done harder routes. The first 2 miles were easy, hardwoods just starting to turn, cold enough to see your breath. I had my Garmin GPS watch and a paper map folded in my chest pocket. Cell signal until about mile 2, then nothing, normal for that area. I stopped at a trail fork around mile 4, wooden post with a yellow blaze. My map showed the fork going left toward the spring. I took it. The creek showed up 20 minutes later, running east to west. No creek there on my map. I figured it was seasonal, just not marked, narrow enough to step over. Dark with tannins, the color of weak coffee. I stepped over it and kept going. That's when I noticed the blaze on the next tree was orange, not yellow. I stopped and looked back. The tree behind me had a yellow blaze, the one ahead had orange. Orange blazes were a different trail entirely, one I hadn't intended to be on. I'd been going the wrong way for about a mile. I could backtrack or I could cut across the ridge and intersect the Horsethief route. The ridge looked close, maybe a quarter mile through the trees. I decided to cut across. That was the mistake. The ridge was further than it looked. I climbed for 30 minutes. The ground was soft from 2 days of prior rain. My boots were caked by the time I reached the crest. When I came over the top, there was no trail on the other side, just more hardwoods going down into a hollow. Cold air sitting in the depression the way it does when the sun doesn't reach until midday and leaves early. I pulled out the Garmin. It was showing my position fine, but I'd downloaded the wrong map tile. I could see where I was. I couldn't see where the trail was. I checked the paper map. I was somewhere in a 2-mile square of nothing labeled. No trails, no roads, no landmarks. I started downhill. Water runs down. Roads follow water. That was my plan. I'd gone about half a mile when I found the campsite. It was tucked back against a rock face, a circle of stones with a fire in it, not a burned-out fire, a fire. The coals were orange, a thin thread of smoke rising straight up in the still air. Someone had been there within the hour, a blue tarp strung between 2 trees, a folding camp chair, a tin cup on one of the stones. I called out, "Hello, anyone here?" Nothing answered. My voice went into the trees and the hollow took it and gave nothing back. No pack, no sleeping bag, no food hung anywhere, just the chair and the cup in the fire going quiet. I touched the top stone of the ring, warm. I didn't touch the cup. I moved around the site in a wide arc and kept going downhill. The light started to change. It was maybe 2:30, but the sky had gone gray, flat and heavy. The front was closer than the forecast had said. Temperature had dropped at least 5 degrees since the ridge. I could feel it on my ears and on the backs of my hands. I moved faster. Then I heard my name. Derek. Just once from behind me, uphill, flat, the way someone reads a name off a list. I stopped. My heart was going. I turned and looked back up the hollow. Nothing moving, no wind. The leaves were dead still. Not a single branch shifted. That kind of still. I told myself it was a hiker calling to someone else. I told myself the acoustics in a hollow play tricks. I stood there for probably 30 seconds, which felt much longer. Then I kept walking. 20 minutes later, I almost walked past the structure. It was set back into a stand of cedar, low to the ground. A hunting blind, old wood, the gray-black color of timber that's been wet and dry 100 times. Maybe 8 feet by 8 feet, a plywood door hanging on one hinge. The cedar around it was thick enough that you'd lose the structure entirely coming from another angle. I wasn't going to stop, but the sky had dropped another shade, and I needed to check my GPS without rain on the screen. I ducked inside just to get a minute out of the weather. It smelled like old canvas and something else, something close and used, not the clean cold smell of somewhere abandoned, something warmer, stale, human. It took a second to place, and I didn't like placing it. There was a cot frame with no mattress, a shelf on the far wall with 3 things on it, a mason jar of something dark, a child's sneaker, white, maybe a size 4, and a photograph face down. I did not turn the photograph over. I looked at the GPS. Nearest road was almost 3 miles southwest. Downhill, follow the drainage, doable before dark if I moved steadily, if I didn't stop again. I heard footsteps outside. Not heavy, deliberate, someone walking around the blinds slowly, each step placed with care in the wet leaves, checking the perimeter. The footsteps stopped at the door. There was a pause, a long one. A man stepped in. Maybe 50, medium build, jeans, a canvas shirt, work boots, no pack, no day pack, no water bottle, nothing in his hands. His face was weathered the way of someone who spends real time outdoors, not weekend time. He looked at me the way you look at someone you've been expecting, not surprised, not cautious, patient. You turned around, he said, back at the fork. I said I'd taken the wrong blaze. He nodded slowly, the way you nod when someone confirms what you already knew. I can walk you out, he said. I know this country. Something moved in my chest, not fear exactly, something quieter than fear, a recognition that things had shifted. I kept my breathing even. I asked him where he'd parked. He said he hadn't driven, he lived near here. I looked at his boots. Clean, no mud. We were standing in a hollow after 2 days of rain. The ground was soft enough that my own boots had been pulling with each step since the ridge. His boots had no mud on them, not a smear, not a dark waterline at the sole, nothing. I held that detail in my head and kept my face neutral. I told him I had the route figured out. I was going to head southwest. He said that wouldn't get me to a road before dark. I said I'd manage. He didn't move from the doorway. He stood with his arms at his sides, not blocking exactly, but filling the frame in a way that required a decision. I picked up my pack and stepped toward him. He moved aside, not quickly, just enough. I walked out and I did not look back at him. I walked hard, I kept my eyes forward. I listened for footsteps behind me for the next 20 minutes, tracking every sound, the drip of water off the cedar canopy, the creak of branches settling, a woodpecker somewhere east. I didn't hear him following. That almost made it worse. The silence behind me was too complete, too consistent, the same silence whether he was there or not. I hit the drainage and followed it down. The ground leveled, the trees thinned. I walked through a wire fence that had been down for years, the barbed wire oxidized to the same rust brown as the dead leaves, and came out on a gravel road. No number on any post I could see. I turned right because the gravel looked more traveled in that direction, the center line worn smoother, the shoulders less overgrown. About a mile down, 2 trail runners came toward me in bright gear, earbuds in. I held up a hand. One of them slowed. I asked if they knew the road. The woman said Highway 270 was 2 miles ahead. I walked the 2 miles. I found my Tacoma at the trailhead. I sat in it with the doors locked for about 5 minutes before I started it. The heater came on and fogged the windows slightly. I just sat there and let the engine idle. I drove straight to the ranger station in Mina. The ranger who took my report was a woman in her 40s. She wrote down everything I said about the campsite, the fire, the blind. When I mentioned the man with no pack, she stopped writing for a second, just a second, then she kept going. I asked if there were other reports from that area. She said they get a lot of reports from that drainage. She didn't say what kind. That night I looked up the trail on a hiking forum. I found a post from 2 years earlier. A guy who'd done the same loop, turned around in the same hollow, found a campsite with a warm fire. He said a man had offered to walk him out. He'd taken him up on it, made it out fine. He said the man knew every trail in there. He said the man never told him his name. I looked at the post date, then I searched for missing hikers in the Ouachita National Forest. There was an article from about 3 years before my trip. A day hiker last seen at the Horsethief Springs trailhead. They found his truck. They found his gear. They never found him. The article said searchers had covered the hollow on the south side of Winding Stair Mountain thoroughly. Thoroughly, that word sat with me for a long time. I still hike. I've been back to the Ouachitas twice. I stay on marked trails. If there's a fork I'm not sure about, I backtrack to the last point I knew for certain. I don't cut across ridges. I don't duck into structures. And if someone without a pack walks out of the trees and offers to show me the way, I say no thank you and I keep walking. I walk faster after that. The cot in the back room had been slept in. There was a cup of coffee next to it. Steam was still coming off it. I need you to understand something before I go any further. I have been inside hundreds of abandoned buildings, factories in the Rust Belt, hospitals in rural Pennsylvania, old schools with water damage so bad the floors bow when you walk. I know what a place looks like when it hasn't held a person in years. I know the smell. I know the stillness. That building was not still. My name is Garrett. At the time I was 29, doing real estate photography as a side job. My main work was appraisal field work, measurements, photos, structural notes. A property management company out of Scranton hired me to photograph and document a building called the Ashmont for an insurance claim before it was scheduled for demolition. The Ashmont was a 5-story department store on the edge of downtown Carbondale in northeastern Pennsylvania. Closed since 2009, half vacant since the mid-90s. Before that, nobody had been inside officially for about 6 years. The management company gave me a key to the main service entrance on Dundas Street. Take wide shots of each floor, note water damage, document any structural concerns. Simple job, 3 hours, maybe 4. I pulled my Tacoma into the alley off Dundas around 10 in the morning. November, cold enough that my breath showed. I had my camera bag, a streamlight flashlight, a clipboard, and a respirator. I had done this dozens of times. The service entrance opened without a problem. The smell hit me first, mold, old carpet, something chemical underneath, and below all of that a faint sweetness I associated with long-term water damage in buildings with a lot of old wood framing. Normal, the ground floor was wide open. Old display cases still in rows, most of them empty, a few with broken glass, dropped ceiling tiles missing in patches, everything coated in gray dust. I started on the ground floor and worked toward the back. Measurements, photos, a section of collapsed ceiling near the south wall, completely standard, took me about 40 minutes. Then I found the stairwell. The door was standing open, the chain that had been wrapped around the push bar was cut. A heavy-duty padlock chain, links thick enough that you'd need bolt cutters to get through it. I picked up one of the cut ends with 2 fingers, no rust on the sheared edge. Fresh metal showed bright silver against the oxidized links on either side. That cut was recent. I told myself someone from the demolition crew had done a preliminary walkthrough, the most reasonable explanation. I noted it on my clipboard and went up. The second floor was storage, old metal shelving, dissolved cardboard boxes, broken pallets, nothing unusual. The dust was thick and undisturbed. The third floor was where the lights had been once, old track lighting hanging at angles. I moved through slowly, keeping my flashlight on the floor so I could see where I was stepping. Halfway across the room I stopped. There was a smell, fresh cigarette smoke. Not old, not embedded in the walls from 20 years ago. Fresh, the kind that lingers when someone steps out of a room 30 seconds before you walk in. Sharp and volatile, not yet absorbed into the damp air. I stood still and breathed in through my nose. Underneath the smoke there was something else, the faint, oily smell of a body that had been in one place for a long time. I stood there and listened. The building made its usual sounds, settling, the distant knock of wind finding a gap somewhere, a metal panel flexing on the exterior. But underneath all of that I thought I heard something on the floor above me, a single creak, deliberate, the kind of sound that has real weight behind it, a shift of pressure, not just thermal expansion. I told myself it was the structure, old buildings creak. I almost believed it. I finished the third floor faster than I meant to and went up to the fourth. The fourth floor had been offices, drop ceiling still intact, a few old desks shoved against the walls, and footprints in the dust. I crouched down and put my light on them. They were leading from the stairwell I had just come up from, but they were not mine, smaller, and they came from a direction I hadn't walked yet. Someone had gone up those stairs before me and turned right toward the back of the building. The edges of the prints were crisp, not degraded by time. The dust in that building was fine and dry, the kind that holds an impression cleanly. These were fresh. I could see the tread pattern, a lug sole, boots, or heavy shoes. I followed them with my flashlight beam without moving my feet. At the far end of the hall, a door was open, just a crack, maybe 6 inches of black space showing. I had not opened that door. I had not been down that hall. I stood up slowly. I walked toward it, not because I was brave, because something told me if I ran, I would regret it more than if I didn't. I pushed the door open with one finger. It was a back office, maybe 12 by 12, no windows. The air inside was warmer than the hallway, noticeably, uncomfortably warmer. Burnt coffee, body heat, something like camp fuel, and in the far corner there was a cot. A real camping cot with a sleeping bag on it, the kind you find at an army surplus store. Beside it on the floor, a plastic milk crate turned upside down as a nightstand. On top of that, a camp stove, a tin mug, and a spiral notebook. The mug had coffee in it. I held my hand over it without touching it. Still warm. I looked at the sleeping bag. It was compressed like someone had just gotten up. The impression was still in the foam padding beneath it, a shallow negative of a person. I looked at the notebook. I didn't pick it up. Then I looked at the wall above the cot, and my stomach dropped. Photographs, newspaper clippings, pages torn from magazines, pinned in rows, dozens of them, and in between, written directly on the wall in black marker, lists, dates, times, patterns. The handwriting was small and even, the kind of small that takes patience. The kind that comes from someone with a lot of time and a reason to be careful. I didn't read what was on that wall. I turned around and walked out. I kept my pace even down the hallway, flashlight pointed forward. My footsteps sounded loud to me and I concentrated on keeping them regular, keeping my breathing slow. The hallway felt longer going back than it had going in. I knew that was fear warping my sense of distance. It didn't help. And then I heard it. Breathing. It was coming from the stairwell I had come up from, not at the top of the stairs. Partway up, patient, slow, controlled, the way breathing is controlled when someone is deliberately keeping it quiet and not quite succeeding. Like someone who had been standing there a while, tracking where I was by the sound of my footsteps. I stopped. I pressed my hand flat against the wall to my left, cold, slightly gritty. I stood there and listened, and the breathing continued, unhurried, steady. Somehow that steadiness was the worst part. It wasn't panicked, it wasn't surprised, it was patient. I turned around and walked to the other end of the hall. There was a second stairwell on the north side of the building. I knew it was there from the floor plan I had reviewed before I came. I went down those stairs without rushing. Every step I listened. The building was quiet. That was somehow worse. I came out on the ground floor, crossed to the service entrance, and walked out into the alley. I did not run until I reached my Tacoma. I sat in the truck with the doors locked. My hands were steady, which surprised me. Outside, Dundas Street looked exactly as it had when I arrived. A few parked cars, a utility truck idling at the far end, the flat white sky unchanged. I sat with the heater running and watched the service entrance in my rearview mirror for probably 2 full minutes. The door had swung shut behind me. Nothing moved. I called the property management contact, a guy named Pete, and told him everything. The cot, the coffee, the photographs on the wall. He was quiet for a long time. Then he called the Carbondale Police Department. 2 officers went through the building that afternoon. They found the room. They confirmed everything I had described: the cot, the sleeping bag, the milk crate, the notebook. There were actually 3 notebooks. The photographs on the wall turned out to be surveillance images. Buildings, storefronts, people walking. Nobody could immediately identify who was in them. They also found evidence of long-term occupation on 2 other floors. Stashes of canned food tucked behind ceiling tiles. A water collection set up near a window on the 2nd floor. A length of rope secured to a roof drain, something someone could have used to get in and out without ever touching the main entrance. Whoever it was had been living there for months, maybe longer. They never found him. I sent Pete my photos and my documentation. He paid me the same day. 6 weeks later, I drove past the Ashmont and saw scaffolding going up around the exterior. They demolished it in the spring. I still do the same work. I still go into empty buildings. But I check stairwells now before I go up. I check exit routes before I go in. And if I ever smell cigarette smoke somewhere it has no business being, I turn around without finishing the job. Some buildings hold on to the people who needed them. Most of the time, those people are gone. Most of the time. It was 3:14 in the morning when I noticed he hadn't moved in 20 minutes. My name is Danny. I was 26 at the time. I worked the overnight shift at a pilot travel center off Route 9 in central Pennsylvania. Not the big kind with a full diner and a trucker's lounge. The small kind, 4 pumps, a cooler wall, a hot dog roller that ran all night even when nobody wanted one. The nearest town was Milheim, about 11 miles east. On a slow night you could go 2 hours without a single car. That night was a slow night. My manager had left around midnight. After that it was just me, the freezer hum, and the static from an old radio I kept behind the counter. By 2 in the morning I'd already swept the floor twice. I was sitting on a stool reading when headlights swept across the window. An older pickup pulled up to pump 4. Faded dark green, looked like an early 90s Chevy Silverado. One of the back panels was a different shade, like it had been replaced after a hit. The cab was hard to see from where I sat, but I watched the driver's side door swing open. The man who stepped out was maybe 50, medium height, brown canvas jacket, ball cap pulled low. He stood by the pump for a moment, not reaching for the nozzle. I figured he was checking his wallet. He swiped a card, the pump approved it. He picked up the nozzle. Then he set it back down. I watched him stand there with his hands at his sides, not on his phone, not stretching his back the way people do after a long drive, just standing there, facing the pump, not doing anything. After maybe 5 minutes, he picked up the nozzle again and started filling. I looked back at my book. When I looked up, the pump had clicked off. The nozzle was back in the cradle. His truck was still there. He was still there, standing on the passenger side now, back to me, facing the empty field across the road. I checked the register, 3:14. I watched him for another minute. He didn't move. Something shifted in my chest, not alarm, just attention. The kind your brain throws up before your thoughts have caught up with it. I stood and walked to the window. The lot was lit with that yellow-orange glow that makes everything look a little sick. His truck was parked straight, engine off as far as I could tell. He was just standing there, arms loose at his sides, looking at nothing. I went back to the counter and picked up my phone. I had full bars, no messages, no deliveries expected. I set the phone down, but I kept it close. At 3:21 he finally moved. He walked around the front of the truck slowly, not toward the store, not back to the driver's door. He walked to the edge of the lot where the pavement meets the gravel, and he stood there again, looking south down Route 9. There was nothing south on Route 9. I'd driven it, cornfields, a shuttered grain elevator, a few farmhouses set back from the road. He turned his head and looked at the store. I stepped back from the window, then felt stupid for it because I was inside and he was outside. I stepped back up. He was still looking. I raised one hand, the kind of wave you give a customer. Neutral, normal. He didn't react, just kept looking. Then he turned back toward the road. I called my manager, 4 rings, voicemail. It was almost 3:30 in the morning, so that made sense. I didn't leave a message. I wasn't sure what I'd even say. At 3:35, the door opened. He came in slow, the bell chimed once. He walked to the coolers in the back and stood there a long time, door open, cold air spilling out. I watched him in the convex mirror mounted in the corner. He wasn't reading labels, he was just staring into the cooler. He finally pulled out a bottle of water, the cheap generic kind. He carried it to the counter. I rang it up, $1.19 with tax. He put 2 bills on the counter and waited. I gave him his change, 81 cents. He took it and counted it, then counted it again. I said, "Everything all right?" He looked at me, his eyes were ordinary, brown, tired, but something about his expression was off. He wasn't unfriendly, exactly. His face had the arrangement of friendliness without the feeling behind it. He said, "Did a white car come through here tonight?" I told him no, it had been empty most of the night. He nodded, not disappointed, not relieved, just nodded, like I'd confirmed something he'd already decided. He went back outside. He did not get in his truck. For the next 40 minutes he alternated between standing near Pump 4 and sitting on the hood of the Silverado. Once he walked to the air machine on the side of the building and stood next to it for a while, not using it, just standing there beside it. I tried my manager again, voicemail. I thought about calling the non-emergency line, but the man hadn't done anything wrong. He bought a water. He was standing in a parking lot. I could already hear how that call would go. Around 4:10, a second vehicle turned off Route 9. A white sedan, older model, something like a Honda Civic, but I couldn't be certain. It pulled into the lot and didn't go to any of the pumps. It parked at the far edge, near the air machine, nose pointed out toward the road. Nobody got out. The man at Pump 4 turned and faced that car. He didn't walk toward it, he didn't wave, he just faced it. The 2 of them out there, one standing, one sitting in the dark of a car, not moving, not communicating, not anything that I could see. I picked up my phone, I dialed 911. I didn't hit send yet, I just held it. About 2 minutes passed, then the white car's reverse lights came on. It backed up slowly, turned, and left the way it had come. No headlights for the first 100 yards, then they flicked on and it was gone. The man watched it go. He watched the road for another full minute after it disappeared. Then he got in his truck. He sat in the cab for maybe 10 minutes. I stood at the window. My thumb was still hovering over the call button. He started the engine. He pulled forward, not toward the road, but around the pump island. Slow, maybe 5 miles an hour, one full loop, then a second. Then he stopped right in front of the store, engine running, about 20 feet from the window. I hit send. The operator picked up. I kept my voice level. I told her my location, the pilot on Route 9 near Milheim, and I said I had a man in a Silverado who'd been in the lot for over an hour, a second car that had pulled in and left without stopping, and that the first man was now idling directly in front of the building. She asked if I felt I was in immediate danger. I said I didn't know. I said something felt very wrong. She told me she was sending a unit. She told me to stay inside. He sat there for 3 minutes, maybe 4, engine running. I couldn't see his face from that angle, just the dark shape of him through the windshield. Then he backed up, pulled onto Route 9, and drove north. No hurry, normal speed. The patrol car arrived 14 minutes later. One officer, young, maybe mid-20s, I told him everything. He took notes. He asked if the man had threatened me directly. I said no. He asked if the man had said anything unusual. I thought about it for a second. He asked if a white car had come through. I said, that was it. The officer's pen stopped. He looked up. He asked if a white car came through, and then a white car showed up an hour later. He didn't say it like a question. He went out to his cruiser and ran the partial plate I'd managed to write down on a receipt. It came back to nothing useful. He drove north and came back 20 minutes later. Nothing. He told me to write everything down while it was fresh. He said someone might follow up. My manager came in at 9 the next morning. I told him the whole thing. He listened. He said, just that. Then he refilled the coffee machine and went to check the cooler inventory. I sat in the parking lot on my break and looked at pump 4. Everything looked ordinary in the daylight. Cigarette butts near the air machine. Tire marks where the sedan had turned around. A paper cup on its side by the curb. Nobody followed up. I called the non-emergency line 3 days later. The officer who answered had no record of a follow-up call. No related incident on file for that night. I still don't know what I was in the middle of, a handoff, a stakeout, something worse that didn't happen because I made that call or because some variable I can't see changed on its own. I've thought about it 100 times. I can't land on an explanation that fits every piece. That white car with no headlights for the first 100 yards, leaving when the man at the pump didn't give it whatever signal it was waiting for. Or didn't give it to me. I transferred to a different location 6 weeks later. Closer to town, busier overnight, better lights. I still check the lot when I come in. I still note what's parked where and for how long and whether anybody's watching the road. Old habit now, probably always will be.